speaker today is Michael Rose, who is a master's student in the English program, graduate of Oklahoma State University, and a participant also in the fellowship program in the Foreign Military Studies Office, working with Ray Finch.
And Matt Stein. Matt Stein is good.
And Matt Stein as well. Thank you. And so his topic today is Uzbekistan and security issues.
Thanks, Bart. Thank you, everyone, for showing up, taking time out of your day. At the heart of Central Asia, the Republic of Uzbekistan shares borders with 5 separate neighbors. It has played a vital role in peacekeeping operations in Afghanistan by facilitating transit of people, machinery, and resources. As the 2014 drawdown plan of the International Peacekeeping Force is implemented, officials occupying the highest positions of the Republic of Uzbekistan are determining how they will secure their borders in the absence of international protection. It is important to know what is behind the national security policies of this key regional actor, the attitudes that direct them, the people and spaces they concern, and the scope of government action prescribed. Many refer to the attitudes of Uzbekistan's government concerning security issues as the Discourse of Danger, which tend to warn of some obscure and fractious threats to social cohesion and safety. Are these threats so obscure, though? Challenges to the authority of the regime are present in both domestic and international spaces. 2014 has seen new security-related legislation and government action intended to address the state's concern for stability. On January 13, 2014, Uzbekistan's President Islam Karimov gave an address to the armed forces and security personnel of Uzbekistan in commemoration of the 22nd anniversary of the founding of independent Uzbekistan's military forces. This address began by mentioning the upcoming 2014 withdrawal of international peacekeeping forces from Afghanistan. Karimov also stated that the military of Uzbekistan must be strengthened and their combat readiness increased. He also warned of the dangers posed by armed terrorists and extremist forces, and that intelligence and military capacities would be improved. The statement outlines some specific measures to increase Uzbekistan's military readiness. Joint exercises of air cavalry and special forces would increase in number. This component of Uzbekistan's military is especially effective in the mountainous terrain of the Fergana Valley. Vehicle repair and training facilities are to be expanded, as well as an increase in training of non-commissioned officers and junior commanders. Islam Karimov also made guarantees of increasing benefits for servicemen, veterans, and their families. He concluded the statement by urging that media outlets promote a positive image of the military in order to cultivate among the youth a sense of patriotism and love for the motherland. It is evident that the readiness and conditions of the military are presently of a high priority. I would argue that this rhetoric or discourse of danger is not just in reference to the 2014 withdrawal from Afghanistan. Several border conflicts have troubled the country over the past decade or so. In 2013, a conflict erupted in Sok. Oh, this is the wrong slide. I apologize. Here we go. Fat fingers here, I apologize. Several border conflicts have troubled the country over the past decade or so. In 2013, a conflict erupted in Sok, the Bakhtyan province of Kyrgyzstan. Sok is an enclave of Uzbek majority villages within Kyrgyzstan, separated but not far from the contiguous border of Uzbekistan. Accounts report that Uzbeks from the area attacked Kyrgyz border guards and later took hostages. Armed clashes followed. Kyrgyz civilians later surrounded the enclave, preventing the arrival of humanitarian aid and support for the Uzbeks within. While the fighting has since subsided, it is difficult to say whether or not tensions have eased. Reporting of these incidents almost always vary in their perspective depending on their sources. In this regard, the exact facts of the incident are seldom agreed upon. Excuse me. Also, in early spring of 2013, an incident occurred at the border between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. Allegedly, a dozen or so Afghan citizens attempted to cross the border over the forest island of Aral-Paygambar. The island itself is marked as the territory of Uzbekistan. Many were shot, and a few reported to have died in the shooting. This incident is similar to many that occurred in 2013 between the two countries. The armed forces of Uzbekistan contended with a serious international threat in the early 2000s, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, or IMU. In 1999, the organization was accused of perpetrating a bombing in Tashkent. In a tit-for-tat response to arrests of IMU members by Uzbek security forces, the IMU infiltrated Kyrgyzstan and took hostages. In 2000, the organization again returned to Kyrgyzstan and kidnapped several foreigners and assassinated a village official. This led to the United States' classification of the IMU as a terrorist organization. After the September 11, 2001 attacks, Uzbek and American forces collaborated to destroy IMU positions and drive them out of Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. Here we see the former key leadership of the IMU. Tohir Yuldashev on the left was the organization's ideologue. He was reportedly killed by a U.S. drone strike in 2009 in Jobe, Pakistan. Juman Namangani on the right was killed in 2001 in Afghanistan during the early stages of Operation Enduring Freedom. Both of these individuals had history with Islam Karimov and had sworn to kill him. With U.S. support, this threat was momentarily eliminated from the picture. Fighters of the formerly scattered IMU have apparently resumed operations. In the summer of 2014, they perpetrated a suicide bombing and armed takeover of the airport in Karachi, Pakistan. The picture here was released by a website of the organization and includes the faces of those who were involved in the attack. Uzbek security officials declared in spring 2014 that the IMU is returning to Badakhshan region, Afghanistan, in the northeast, which borders Uzbekistan and Pakistan, where its members are allegedly engaging in narcotics and arms trafficking with remnants of the Taliban. According to an official of the National Security Service, Khotib Sadikov, the current number of IMU fighters is more than 5,000 men. A few years ago, the IMU was based mostly near the Afghan-Pakistan border. Today, we are concerned about the movement and relocation of IMU fighters toward the north of Afghanistan and closer to the border with former Soviet republics. Uzbek officials believe that this organization is receiving funding from somewhere in Pakistan, and they will work to monitor the migration, recruitment operations, and their distribution of recruitment literature. Uzbekistan's border regime has recently undergone significant changes in order to adapt to the changing results of migration patterns. Individuals migrate illegally to the north in order to look for work in Kazakhstan and Russia. Not only are these individuals exposed to risks of kidnapping and exploitation, but in 2013 and 2014, they are sometimes recruited to fight jihad in Syria and Iraq. Their transit is arranged by the recruiters. The Uzbek government has implemented measures to address these developments. The old passports have been replaced by the chipped biometric passports, which contain descriptive information concerning the intended carrier. This makes it easier for border guards to accurately identify individuals and detect false documents. In 2014, the measures to improve exit law was passed by the cabinet of the ministers of the Oli Majlis, Uzbekistan's legislature. Citizens may not return from abroad if they are not in possession of the new passports. The measures state that citizens may apply for the new passports if they are currently abroad, but it is implied that the government will have the authority to approve or deny the issuance of these passports. This measure can block the re-entry of criminals, for example, those who have volunteered to jihad in the Middle East, but also deny re-entry to other possibly non-violent citizens, such as migrant workers and citizens in exile. In March 2014, restrictions were placed that required the exit of government officials to be personally approved by the President of Uzbekistan. The Uzbek government is also wary of domestic opposition and instability. The Uzbekistan branch of the religious political organization Hizb ut-Tahrir calls for the non-violent overthrow of Islam Karimov. On the macro scale, the organization recruits and campaigns for the establishment of a global caliphate consisting of highly compartmentalized designs of theocratic governments. In 1999, after an alleged assassination attempt on Islam Karimov, the organization was banned and its outspoken members were arrested. Arrests on charges of affiliation with Hizb ut-Tahrir continue to the present. Hizb ut-Tahrir has a web page for the Uzbekistan branch and frequently posts videos on YouTube. The videos often list names of those arrested, incarcerated, and allegedly tortured and murdered. Running contrary to their promoted preference of nonviolence, many of these videos include prayers calling for a swift destruction of Islam Karimov and his administration. Domestic opposition is not polarized between religious political movements and the state-approved political parties. There exists a substantial, relatively secular-oriented domestic opposition to the government. The Irk Party was one of such, but was eventually banned and its leader Muhammad Salih exiled. Salih's exile in Turkey does not appear to have silenced him, and he is rumored to have issued a call to arms against Islam Karimov in 2012, allegedly appealing to all Uzbeks who considered themselves to be in good conscience to arm themselves and take to the street. With Salih denying that he ever made this statement, it is difficult to see the truth behind the publication. Unlike Irk, the Berdemlik Party remains active in organizing political opposition and demonstration against the government. Their demonstrations are typically few in number out of the fear of the suppression that consistently follows their appearances. Bahadur Churiyev, leader of the movement, has lived in exile in the United States for the past few years. He is known to be a successful entrepreneur, owning a distribution network here in the States, and remains a vocal opponent of Islam Karimov and the government. In an alleged effort to silence Bahadur, his father Hassan was arrested on what are rumored to be trumped-up charges of sexual assault of a minor. Hassan was incarcerated, tortured, and unfortunately died from health complications after his release. Bahadur asserts that his father was arrested in an attempt to silence Bahadur and suppress Berdemlik. In April 2014, as Berdemlik Party members prepared to leave the country to attend a Congress of Uzbek peoples in St. Louis, Missouri, their exits were denied under the pretense that their travel documents were not in order. The leader of Berdemlik in Uzbekistan, activist Malahat Jashankulova, was denied in this fashion and was also rumored to have been poisoned. Hassan Shariyev, pictured on the left, died in July of 2013. Bahadur Shariyev, on the right, continues to engage in political activity. He was an instrumental organizer of the April 2014 Kurultai in St. Louis. At the Kurultai Congress, Bahadur and others discussed their desires to implement a color revolution in Uzbekistan, and similar to those witnessed in Georgia, Ukraine, and Kyrgyzstan. During the Maidan protests, a group of artists and political activists rallied in solidarity with the Maidan protesters in Tashkent. In Tashkent, they rallied in solidarity with those protesters in Maidan, Ukraine. The participants were quickly arrested and detained. The fast response by Uzbek security forces is an example of the low tolerance the government has for organized political demonstrations advocating any sort of change in the establishment. On the right, you can see family members of those detained protesting for their release. The man on the left holds a list of those detained. The man on the right holds a sign which reads, "We are working for immediate release." We're demanding. The protesters were eventually freed, but penalized with stiff fines. As unauthorized political assembly is forbidden, this is the typical response by the state against civil protests and demonstrations. Putting the voices of political and religious opposition together, the Cabinet of Ministers passed a regulation in spring 2014 titled "On Measures to Improve the Activities in the Field of Manufacturing, Import, and Distribution of Religious Materials" that regulates the distribution and production of religious or politically themed material. The legislation covers media in the form of DVD, CD, cassettes, print, digital, and publications on the internet. Authors are required to register with the state censor before producing any political or religiously themed media, providing their names, addresses, and the intended quantity of the material to be circulated. Essentially, the extent to which any of these materials contain any sort of religious or political themes is entirely up to the will of the state censor and customs officials. The government of Uzbekistan is working to field a wide array of perceived threats from within both international and domestic spheres. The Uzbek government will likely continue to increase its military readiness and capacities in anticipation of the withdrawal of international peacekeepers from Afghanistan. Domestic and international challenges of the state do exist, so the state is likewise appearing to assume a form of vigilance and in some cases perhaps hypervigilance. This is all evident in the direction that recent national security legislation is taking through the country. The real challenge for the country will be to find an effective and reasonable implementation of national security legislation. I'd like to thank REES here and PHMSA for funding this research, which I conducted last semester, and funding my education from 2013 to 2014 academic year. Thank you.